Well, first on BBC One, the news and sport comes from Jan Leeming. The time now, 10 minutes to 10.
Eight miners are still in hospital after an explosion 2,000 feet underground. A top TUC leader says the government's excluding unions from a share in economic planning. The outcome could be civil disobedience. 5 non-league teams go into the draw for the third round of the FA Cup, but their luck seems to have run out. 1 miner is still in intensive care and 3 others are seriously hurt after a pit explosion near Coventry. 4 others are being kept in hospital at least overnight. Both the miners' leader, Arthur Scargill, and the deputy chairman of the coal board, John Mills, have been to see the injured men, and both have also been to the Coventry colliery at Carsley. It took 2 hours to get all 26 injured men, who were part of an emergency rescue team, to the surface. They'd been trying to control a pocket of burning coal 2,000 feet down by walling off a shaft when the explosion occurred. Emergency teams are still down the pit trying to seal off the burning coal. After his visit, Arthur Scargill said the union would be investigating the explosion alongside the coal board in an attempt to make all pits explosion-proof. Chris Powell reports.
The injured men were investigating a build-up of carbon monoxide in a shaft being driven into a new coal face. It was the deputy manager who discovered the burning coal behind the steel arches of the tunnel. He and emergency teams of colliery men and the Mines Rescue Service were sealing off the area when the explosion happened. Methane gas from the coal was ignited by the fire. All 26 men were taken to hospital, but remarkably no one was killed. Pit explosions are much feared by miners, so had they had a lucky escape?
Oh, I think there's no doubt that they did. See, one of the big dangers in mines, of course, is if you get a coal dust explosion, where you get terrible violence and a lot of afterdamp, which is dangerous to the men. I think this one we can count ourselves fortunate that it was only really a methane explosion, serious as though as that was.
Work has started to seal the tunnel with a 10-foot thick plug of plaster and wood. It'll never be reopened. Around £1 million worth of equipment has been abandoned in the tunnel, and Coventry Colliery's lost 1/3 of its production. But the NCB hope to have the rest of the pit back in action on Monday.
A chemical plant at Stalybridge was badly damaged this morning by an explosion in which 1 man was slightly injured. It began when a condenser blew up. The resulting fire spread to some damaged tanks containing the inflammable chemical toluene, and this started a running blaze. But firemen quickly brought the fire under control using foam, and people living in the vicinity didn't have to leave their homes. 15 months ago, a man died in an explosion at another chemical plant in Stalybridge. The leader of one of Britain's biggest trade unions has issued a strong warning to the government about the danger of forcing the unions to become insurrectionist and to commit acts of civil disobedience. David Basnett, head of the General and Municipal Workers, told a Labour Party economic conference in London that the unions wanted to work with the government, but he added, another 5 years of this, another 5 years of the exclusion of the trade union movement from influence on economic affairs, could convert us into an insurrectionist trade union movement committed to civil disobedience. Mr. Basnett said later he hadn't meant to be inflammatory, only to point out the danger. Our political correspondent Noel Lewis was at today's conference.
Mr. Basnett's strong warning of union discontent at this official Labour conference is certain to be seized on by Conservatives as justification for additional curbs on trade unions, which are intended for their next election manifesto. But Mr. Basnett, as chairman of the TUC's Economic Committee, and other union leaders, have been so discouraged by the lack of involvement in discussion of economic policy with the government that they've considered withdrawing from the National Economic Development Council. That includes ministers, the TUC and CBI. Today's conference was called to allow delegates the opportunity to consider Labour's future economic strategy, which would involve close planning and cooperation with the unions. Afterwards, I asked Mr. Basnett to explain his warning.
Now, obviously, the leadership of the movement as it exists wants to continue with the creation of consensus in society. But if that's going to be impossible, then obviously we'll have to look at the methods by which we do our business on economic affairs. And you already see signs of that, for instance, direct action to stop imports, instead of discussion with government being effective on the introduction of import controls.
But you also used the word civil disobedience.
Yes, that's right, I did.
What had you in mind?
Well, again, to repeat what I have just said, I said there is a danger of that emerging if this government goes on killing pluralistic democracy in our society so that trade unions are excluded from influence on the affairs that affect their members.
Among other speakers at the conference, Tony Benn declared that the Conservatives had caused such damage that the next Labour government would have to replan the economy on a scale unknown since wartime. Labour's economic spokesman, Peter Shaw, claimed that the economy was so damaged that unemployment could rise to 4 million within the next year. But careful planning with the unions would be needed to balance extra public spending and reduce taxation.
Lech Wałęsa, the Solidarity leader, has appealed to the Polish government to release detainees, introduce an amnesty and reinstate those sacked for union membership. That, he said, was the only way to end Poland's long crisis. He made his appeal in a letter to General Jaruzelski, his first communication with the government since his release 4 weeks ago. But even as Wałęsa attended Mass today, his appeal seems to have fallen on deaf ears, according to our Warsaw correspondent. The government has indicated detainees won't be released immediately and martial law will only be suspended, not lifted. Jeffrey Prime, jailed last month after he admitted spying for Russia, is to appeal against his 35-year sentence. It's the second longest sentence in British legal history. He's serving a further 3 years for indecent assault. Police in the Irish Republic have found an arms dump in a disused farmhouse. Almost 50 new rifles, thought to have been left there by the Irish National Liberation Army. They've been sent for forensic tests to find out if they were used in recent terrorist offences. The guns and ammunition were found about 20 miles from the border with the north. More than 100 police have been searching wasteland in Gainsborough and making house-to-house inquiries after the death of a 12-year-old boy. His body was found yesterday, but it's not yet known how he died. Now, with news of today's FA Cup ties, the draw for the third round and the rest of today's sport, here's David Cass.
The biggest shock of the day was at Third Division Cardiff. In their cup match, the home side were defeated by the amateurs of non-league Weymouth. Bob Humphries describes the match. Cardiff are playing in blue.
Cardiff weren't expected to have too much trouble disposing of the part-timers of Weymouth, and when Roger Gibbins scored with a diving header midway through the first half, it looked as if everything was going to plan. 10 minutes before half-time, it seemed as if Weymouth were down and out of the cup as Cardiff's top scorer, Jeff Hemmerman, lashed onto a ball from Bennett to beat Baker in the Weymouth goal. But the second half was a totally different story. Weymouth, with nothing to lose, threw caution to the winds, and Annie Iannoni, a Naples-born window cleaner, pulled a goal back with a brilliant header. More was to come as Cardiff, who've been among the leaders in Division 3 this season, found themselves pegged back on level terms when Trevor Finnegan got Weymouth's equaliser. And 5 minutes from the end, what many would have considered the impossible happened. Jerry Pearson hit home Baber's cross for the biggest cup shock of the day. But Weymouth's prize wasn't as glittering as it might have been. They've been drawn away in the third round to Second Division Cambridge.
In all, 5 non-league clubs went into the draw for the third round. Worcester were another side who knocked out third division opposition from Wales. They beat Wrexham 2-1. Boston United drew with Sheffield United and Telford United with Tranmere Rovers. The only second-round tie which was certain of producing a non-league winner was at Slough, where Town met Bishop Stortford. It was like playing in a mud bath, which made the ball control of Slough's Gary Attrell in the gold shirt all the more admirable. But Bishop Stortford had applied most pressure, and early in the second half, a back pass which stuck in the mud let in Lyndon Lynch. Minutes later, as Slough counter-attacked, the home supporters were convinced that Rowan Dodds was fouled in the penalty area. They were happier as Dylan Evans powered in the header to equalise. But then Stortford did what they'd been threatening all afternoon. They simply overran Slough. Lyndon Lynch was left unmarked as the goalkeeper misjudged the cross. 2-1. Terry Sullivan provided the cross and Joe Simmons somehow retained enough balance in the swamp to volley home Stortford's third. And finally, from a free kick out in the murk by the far corner flag, Lyndon Lynch completed his hat-trick. 4-1 to Bishop Stortford. It's the first time they've been this far in the FA Cup. But the draw for the third round proved an unkind one for most of the 5 non-league sides. Boston will be at home if they beat Sheffield United in their replay. But Weymouth, Worcester and Bishop Stortford are drawn away. However, if Telford beat Tranmere, they'll fill their ground in a derby match with Wolves. Arsenal share the luck of their North London rivals Spurs in being drawn at home. They'll play Bolton on January the 8th. League champions Liverpool go to Ewood Park, European champions Villa to Gillingham or Northampton, and the tie of the round will see West Ham visit Old Trafford. Spurs' run of luck sees them at home again, this time to Southampton. And Queen's Park Rangers, unlucky finalists last season,